With one other thing. And here's where I'm going to get to another crucial aspect of Franklin Roosevelt's performance as president. And that is his use of the predominant medium of his day. I said earlier that the presidency really changed in the 20th century, in the age of mass communication. You can see the change begin with Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was the first president of the age of cheap newspapers. The penny press developed in the 1890s. And Theodore Roosevelt understood how to deal with newspaper reporters. He understood the timing of newspaper reporting. He understood the distinction between morning newspapers and evening newspapers, and how you could get certain things into the afternoon papers that wouldn't go to the morning papers and vice versa. He knew that if you wanted to get bad news out, you'd give it on a Friday afternoon, because then it wouldn't make the major papers until Monday morning, and people would have had something to forget about in the meantime. Franklin Roosevelt took advantage of the new medium in his day, radio. And radio is, I would argue, is the most intimate of the mass communications mediums. Because Roosevelt was able to speak to the American people by the millions, but also one by one. In the sense that people listening in their homes could listen to Franklin Roosevelt and imagine that he was speaking to them one by one. Now, in this day of the internet, you can listen to Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chats. These fireside chats were his radio addresses to the American people. They took place about 3 or 4 times a year. Presidents today, President Clinton, President Bush, have given, and do give, weekly radio addresses. And nobody listens to them. Have any of you ever heard one of the President's weekly radio addresses? Nobody listens to them because they happen every week. And you know that what he's saying on the radio is not going to be different than what he said on television. So they're really beside the point. And they make it difficult to recapture how important Roosevelt's fireside chats were. In the first place, he did these very rarely, just on really big occasions, a couple times a year. Secondly, this was the only way you could hear the president in real time. There was no television. And so when Roosevelt gave one of the fireside chats, the nation stopped. And they listened, and they paid attention. And Roosevelt had this voice. He had a command of the lexicon and the style of delivery of radio that made him exceedingly effective. And it was another aspect of this performance. Was it insincere? Not at all. The thing that made it work so well is he believed what he was saying, but he also understood that it was a performance. If he performed well, then he had a much better chance of accomplishing what he wanted to accomplish. If he didn't perform very well, then he probably wouldn't. Herbert Hoover occasionally gave radio addresses, but Herbert Hoover didn't understand the use of the medium. He didn't have the personality. He didn't have this sense that what he was doing while giving this performance was as important as anything else that he was doing as president. I guess the moral of the story for Franklin Roosevelt and for the great presidents as performers is they understand that the performance is as important as anything else they do as president. The performance is as important as the policy itself. Herbert Hoover was brilliant on policy. He could analyze policy. He was as smart as anybody ever occupied the White House. But he underestimated the importance of the role of the president. He couldn't connect emotionally with the American people. Franklin Roosevelt did it. In the age of television, the most successful of the performers was Ronald Reagan, has been Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan displayed a mastery of television. He knew how to present himself on television. He knew the kind of effect that he was having. He knew how to tell a joke. He knew when to smile. He knew how to use anecdotes, when to bring sort of props on stage. His State of the Union addresses. Typically there would be some ordinary person, a fireman, a school teacher, that he would point to in the gallery. And he would tell the story, this little vignette of this person. And it would personalize the whole thing. And even Reagan's opponents, even people who disagreed with Reagan's policies, had to acknowledge that he was extremely effective. Now we live in a new era. We live in the new age of the internet. Is there a politician today who has mastered the use of the internet? I don't think anybody in particular stands out. In fact, see, I don't even know how a politician would use the internet exactly. But that's the whole nature of these new media. Nobody knew what to make of mass circulation newspapers until Theodore Roosevelt came along. Nobody understood what a politician, what a president could make of the radio until Franklin Roosevelt demonstrated. Nobody really understood how effective television could be until Ronald Reagan showed that. So how about the internet? I don't know. I guess the great president of the internet age has yet to come along. Who will he or she be? I don't know.